Hello everybody. We are starting on my personal favorite, social culture anthropology. This is what I actually have my degree in, and it's, in my opinion, the most interesting part of anthropology. Okay, obviously we're going to be studying, or this section of anthropology focuses on society and culture. All right. This week we're going to be going over kind of like the general definitions, what people do, what's important, and then next week we're going to go into the spicy stuff. Alright? So before we move on, let's talk about some announcements. Alright? So be sure to read and watch our material. You know that. Make sure to do this week's quizzes by Friday. Okay? You guys already know that. And for my hybrid class, of course, they are due on Thursday in class. Reflection 2 is due this Friday because my mistake. It was supposed to be due last Friday, but because, I posted it late, I'll give you guys until Friday to get it done. And then Reflection 3 is not due until next Friday. Okay? The week after that will be the midterm. Alright? Pretty straightforward. There's going to be no surprises here. Okay? Great. Okay. So, let's get into it. When we're going over this, I want you to think about something, the difference between something that is natural and something that is cultural. Alright, so I want you to think about like what it means to be natural, what it means to be cultural. And when I talk about something natural, I'm namely referring to things that are biological versus something that's cultural, which is something that you're taught. Okay? Alright, social culture anthropology. Social culture anthropology is a study of human society and culture. This subfield describes, analyzes, interprets, and explains social and cultural similarities and differences. Pretty straightforward, but I also think that there should be another sentence here that talks about not only the similarities and differences, but more importantly, drawing the line as to what it means to be human, right? There are many other animals that are intelligent, but not all animals are, not all animals have culture, right? There are many people with different practices, but they're still people. So what is it that links us or doesn't link us? Okay, so I would like to add those two little points in here. Alright, obviously a big part of social culture anthropology is culture. Surprise, surprise. Okay, now the thing about culture is that, yes, what you understand and what is used in mainstream society as a definition for culture does count as culture, but I want you to try your best to put aside that definition and kind of apply the anthropology to the definition. Okay, so culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Okay, that sounds very straightforward, but I need you to look at the examples they have. Culture, that complex whole. Okay, complex whole, meaning it's not just one thing. They're all connected, right? It is no surprise, for example, that in America, the workday is from like 9 to 5. Guess when daycare lets out? Guess when restaurants get busy? Guess when certain types of TV programming come out? That is a complex whole, right? It's not just school. It's also work. It's not just work. It's also dinner. It's not just dinner. It's also traffic. All these things are part of that complex whole. Okay. What does that complex whole include? Knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So you already have all those: knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, whatever. But more importantly, capabilities and habits acquired. Now this is very important, acquired. What does acquired mean? Acquired means learned. Okay? It means like you got something, you learned something. In this case, the opposite of learned, in this case, would be inherited, right? Like you inherit black hair from your mom or dad. Acquired is the opposite of that. Acquired is something that you get, that you obtain. It's not something that you're born with. Okay? So that's a very important point right there. Culture is something that is learned. It is not something that you are born with. Very important. Okay? member of society. There has to be a society in order for there to be culture. Okay? Now, how do people, or what is the process of learning culture? That is called enculturation. People acquire culture, they get culture, by growing up in a particular society in which they are exposed to a specific culture tradition. Enculturation is the process by which a child learns his or her culture. Very straightforward, right? So this is very important, though, because enculturation is the process of people learning culture, more specifically kids learning culture. And I want you to think to yourself, what are some of the biggest sources of culture, biggest sources of learning culture that we have in our lives, right? Obviously parents, okay? Obviously family. What about school? What about TV? What about YouTube? All these things, right? It's not just your mom or dad telling you don't put your elbows on the table, right? It's also other things that you learn in school, other things you learn through, at least when I was younger, watching TV. Nowadays, I don't know, it's a little bit different now, watching Netflix, I guess, right? So, enculturation is the process in which a child learns culture, okay? Now, how is culture learned? Humans uniquely learn culture through symbols. Symbols are signs that have no necessary or natural connection to the things they stand for or signify. That kind of should already make sense. I know it sounds complicated, it's not. Symbols are just things that have no connection to biology, I guess you could say, right? So like, remember, so I gave an example before. A cat, in China and a cat in America, they will make similar sounds when they're hungry. They'll react the same way when they're cold, whatever. Humans, because of cultural learning, because of culture, will act differently when they're hungry, will act differently when they're cold because of where they're from, right? And symbols is kind of like that, but just for culture, okay? So, for example, when we use language, right? When we say the words that we say, those are all symbols. Why? Because what we're saying doesn't actually have any connection to the definition. If I say the word apple, does my word apple have any literal connection to the fruit of an apple? No, it's just the symbol of it. Okay, so this, don't worry, don't kill yourself trying to think about this, but just know that when we communicate, it's through symbols. We understand things that represent other things. Okay? Now, most importantly, culture is learned in these three different ways: experience, social, and observation. The first thing, experience, right? And this is, you can think of it as first-hand experience. Let's say you are a kid in a classroom, and the teacher asks, what's 2 plus 2? And you yell out, 4. Right? And the teacher's like, Jimmy, next time, please raise your hand before yelling out the answer. And you learn right then and there, okay, culturally, I need to raise my hand, or whatever, or culturally, I can't yell, right? That's experience. Let's talk about social. Social is when people around you, okay, are telling you the consequences, but you aren't suffering them. For example, let's say the teacher asks you what's 2 plus 2, and you're about to yell out the answer, but then your friend is like, yo, you can't yell in here, you gotta raise your hand first. And you're like, oh, okay, in this classroom, I need to raise my hand. That's social. Alright? Finally, observation. Observation is just like it sounds. You see other people, or you view other people and what they're doing, and you follow that, right? So let's say in this case, 2 plus 2, what's 2 plus 2, right? And you see around you, no one's yelling out the answer, and everyone's raising their hands. And because you see that, you're like, oh, I should raise my hand too. Okay? So those are the three ways people learn culture. Experience, first-hand experience, right? Going through the consequences of maybe doing something culturally incorrect. Social, which is maybe your friend or other people around you telling you what is culturally correct. And finally, observation is you viewing how culture, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable around you, right? And obviously these three are very, very intense in school, right? Especially preschool, okay? The teachers are taught to teach the kids how to interact in our society, essentially, right? Everything there is made for students to learn how to interact in our society, okay? How are some ways that people learn culture? How could culture affect the future of said person? So, this is just for you to think about it, but it's very straightforward, you know, like, again, personal, like just direct consequences, indirect or theoretical consequences given you by your friends, and finally, you looking around and seeing what's around you to follow that culture, right? So it's like, that will define or determine how the people in that classroom view you. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. This little point here I forgot to mention. Sometimes culture is taught directly, but it's also internalized indirectly, right? So sometimes culture is taught directly. Hey, son, don't put your elbows on the table. But sometimes it's also taught indirectly, right? Where you see everyone else doesn't have elbows on the table, or maybe when you have elbows on the table, everyone's staring at you. Whatever it is, sometimes culture is taught directly, but sometimes it's also taught indirectly. I'd actually argue that most of the culture we learn is indirect. Okay. So, culture is an attribute not of individuals per se, but of individuals as members of groups. Enculturation unifies people by providing us with common experiences. Today's parents were yesterday's children. Very little of what we think is original or unique. Okay. Now, these are three very important points that I want to talk about culture. So, culture is an attribute not of individuals, but of individuals as members of groups. So, culture, yes, it is dependent on you. But you also have to understand that culture is not just you, it's also everybody else. And most importantly, you're not a voluntary participant of culture. It just so happens that that's the way it is, right? Everyone participates in culture whether they like it or not. And as long as you're a member in a society, which means any group of people over like 2 or 3 people, you're contributing to culture. Okay? Enculturation, the process of learning culture, unifies people by providing us with common experiences. Today's parents were yesterday's children. Okay? So, this is pretty straightforward. When you go through the process of learning culture, you find that there are other people with similar experiences, right? I'm talking about really general stuff, like, oh, you used to go to school and this TV show would play on ABC? Wow. Or, hey, you used to go to school, period, right? Like, it can be as general as you want, but whatever, regardless of what it is, they unite people through common experiences, okay? And the last thing, this is very important. I just like to get the edgy people out of here, or edgy people a little angry. But very little of what we think is original or unique. It's not to say that what you're thinking is not special or different, but it is saying that what you're thinking is built off of something else. Okay, built off of something else. This is very important. You should think of culture as a scaffold, and the scaffold keeps building up and up and up, right? Sometimes you look down and you don't even know where the scaffold starts, but the main point is that you have to keep building on top of it. Okay? People tend to spend time with others that share cultural backgrounds. This often leads to being with people that share values and thus have similar opinions, right? And when we talk about values and cultural backgrounds, I don't want you to think about geographical backgrounds, right? Oh, this person is Mexican, this person's Chinese, this person's Russian. Don't think about it that way, because that is not very in-depth, okay? What's more important is people tend to spend time with others that share cultural background and values. Think about people. Oh, I got it. People that are into restaurants and food. And now think of someone that's into, I don't know, freaking like fire trucks. Okay? Those two people have very different values and very different cultural backgrounds, right? Now, what is interesting though is the person who's in a restaurant, who owns a restaurant, might know someone that's in the flower business because they buy, you know, plasticware from the same vendor, right? The person that's really into tow trucks might know a lot about, I don't know, King's Plaza or something, right? Because that's where they need to go to buy tow trucks. Whatever. There are things that we share with each other that are common, right? Even in our class, right? So if you made a friend in the class, first of all, you probably have tons of cultural experience that's shared. We all live in, or most of us live in Brooklyn, and we all definitely live in New York City. We also share that, guess what, we're in the same freaking class with Mr. Fong, you know, Anthropology 37, right? These are all things that we share culturally, okay? So don't just think about geographical stuff. Think about actual experiences, okay? Have you ever been in an environment that you're culturally foreign to? Okay? Now, for some people this is a difficult question, for some people this is an easy question. When I say culturally, I don't mean, again, geography. I mean, like, for example, for me, the first time walking into a fancy restaurant, that was culturally foreign to me. The first time, I don't know, the first time, you know, going into a police, you know, office or whatever, culturally foreign. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. Not just geographical, like Mexican, Chinese, Russian, or whatever. Like, we're talking about experiences. Culture and nature. There are natural biological urges we share, but it is always modified by culture. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means that are we motivated by nature? Yes, right? Things like eating, sleeping, drinking, using the or, you know, urinating, defecating, having sex, all these things are biological urges. But all of those things, no matter how important, are always modified by culture. Even just now, when I was about to tell you, urinating and defecating, I was going to say use the bathroom. But guess what? That's a cultural modification, right? We could just drop our pants and use the bathroom right there and there on the sidewalk. But guess what? Because of culture, because we believe it is inappropriate, we don't do that. Okay? So keep that in mind. Everything that is natural in life, everything that is biological, is always modified by culture. Think about food, right? For Ramadan, people fast. For you know, Chinese Lunar New Year, or for Lunar New Year, people feast. For the Buddhist holidays, they eat only vegetables. Like, right? These are all things that we modify our biological urges with. Okay. An example I have here is think about health and what is healthy. How do you know if someone is healthy or not? You know, quite frankly, when I think of someone healthy, I think of someone that's fit. When I think of someone's healthy, I think of someone that's very lean. I think of someone with like a six-pack, you know, muscles, kind of like a gym advertisement, right? But quite frankly, just because they have those muscles, just because they're that lean, doesn't mean they're healthy. I know, you know, especially in the fight game, there's a lot of people that are very lean and very, you know, muscularly very good looking, but are not very healthy on the inside, right? So what's the definition of health then? Does that make sense? So our definition of health doesn't even translate all the way across, you know, because health should be what qualities about this person to help them live longer, you know, and I think, you know, health wise, it's good to be a little bit overweight, just a little bit, but we don't think of that as healthy, right? We think of the six-pack and the biceps and triceps, that's looking healthy. Okay. Culture is everywhere and everybody. Culture, as defined anthropologically, encompasses features that are sometimes considered trivial or unworthy. Cultures are not haphazard collections of customs and beliefs. Cultures are integrated pattern systems. If one part of the system changes, other parts also change. Cultures train their individual members to share certain personality traits. A set of characteristic core values integrates each culture and helps distinguish it from others. Now, I'm going to go through this one more because these are very important bullet points of culture. Culture, as defined anthropologically, encompasses features that sometimes are considered trivial or unworthy. In fact, I would go even further and say that culture, for anthropologists, the more trivial and the more boring, the more anthropologists look at it. Okay? So, for example, and this is the best example I could give, right? When I did one of my projects when I was in grad school, I literally just sat in a pizza shop for like 2 hours, right? And the small thing I noted was that people that were from New York City, had been to New York City or lived in New York City or something like that, have familiarity with New York City's culture, they order pizza differently, right? They say, "Can I have a regular slice?" While tourists usually said, "Can I please have a cheese piece of pizza or cheese slice or cheese something," right? And is that 100% accurate? Of course not. But still, the main point here is that that little thing spent 3 or 4 hours of me just like sitting there in a pizza joint, just seeing how people order, see how people talk, and the way that people do things, right? So that observation, that kind of noticing of the details is very important to anthropologists. Let me give you another example, just like theoretically. Let's say you have a friend and your mom owns a restaurant. Your friend is like, "I love your mom's food, I love your mom's restaurant," and he's never there. Does that mean he actually loves the restaurant? Does that mean he actually loves the food? We don't know, but his behavior is suggesting something is different from what he's saying, right? And that's kind of the importance of the boring behavior, is that you look at your friend, you're like, "You know what? It's been like a year and you haven't been to my mom's restaurants once, so do you actually really like it or not?" Does that make sense? Okay. Cultures are not haphazard collections of customs and beliefs. Cultures are integrated pattern systems. If one part of the system changes, other parts also change. So as we talked about earlier, culture is a bunch of things. It's not just one thing, right? The workday, like I talked about earlier, 9 to 5. It is no surprise that, guess what? School starts at 8:30, let's say, because guess what? You need to go to work. It's no surprise that after-school programs hold you until 5:36 because guess what? You get out at 5. It is no surprise that restaurants start getting packed at 6:37. Okay. It is no surprise that children's cartoons are played at 7 p.m. right after dinner or whatever. Okay. These are all different parts of culture that are changing if one thing because of one thing, right? If the workday was a different time period, that would change all those things I just mentioned, right? And the example I have here is women working, World War II. A lot of the men were out working. We're out serving in the military, and women just wanted to make more money, right? And so they got jobs. But guess what? That changed the whole dynamic of American culture because women started appearing in the workplace. They changed the whole dress code for women. It changed the food industry. A lot of the food became more reliant on TV dinners or instant food. It changed the workday and what was acceptable for people to work. These are all different changes just from women working, right? Did women want to make all these changes? No. The women just literally were doing this to make some extra money. But because they did that, and because culture is kind of like it's kind of like a pond of water. When you drop a rock in it, all the ripples, things all across the pond will change. The ripples will go. Okay? So, the last thing, cultures train their individual members to share certain personality traits, a set of characteristic core values, integrates each culture, and helps distinguish from others. Okay? So, this is kind of stupid, but yeah, like, there are certain things that societies want to instill in their people, right? So, for example, in America, hard work, right? Hard work, they love to talk about hard work. Whether everyone works hard is a different situation, but hard work is important, right? Underdog stories are a huge emphasis in America. These are just things that Americans tend to value or that you're taught to value, okay? Adaptive and maladaptive. So why am I putting this in here? This is similar to talk about human imagination. When we're talking about culture, we're not talking about things that are more or less efficient. Things that humans do happen, like randomly sometimes, okay? So culture is sometimes adaptive and sometimes maladaptive. Sometimes it's good for you, sometimes it's bad for you. All right, so adaptive being good for you, it's like, taking a walk after eating dinner. A lot of people like to do that after having a meal. That's very good for you, good for digestion, whatever. But there's a bunch of maladaptive stuff too, like smoking, right? That's terrible for you. It'll make you literally die faster. Carbon, was it the CFCs, the stuff in the hairspray and stuff that was destroying the ozone layer. Overpopulation, food, like, you know, freaking Tyson Farms, poor food distribution. Overconsumption, you know, the supersize me at freaking McDonald's, and environmental degradation, the deforestation of the Amazon. These are all things that are terrible for human survival, but we still do them because of cultural factors, right? So again, the main point here is that culture is neither bad nor good all the time. It could be both. All right. Universality, generality, and particularity. Anthropologists agree that cultural learning is uniquely elaborated among humans and that all humans have culture. Anthropologists also agree that although individuals differ in their emotional, intellectual tendencies and capacities, all human populations have equivalent capacities for culture, regardless of their genes or their physical appearance. People can learn any cultural tradition. Similar cultural causes have produced similar cultural results. Okay? This is very important. Everybody can learn culture. Now, whether, and this is the part where you have to be part of a society, whether that society will accept you as someone that represents that culture is something different. But culture can be learned by anybody. Okay? By anybody. Culture and individuality. Cultural rules provide guidance about what to do and how to do it, but people don't always do what the rules say should be done. People use their culture actively and creatively rather than blindly following its dictates. Now, basically what this is saying is culture is a framework. Does it mean that everyone follows the rules? No. But what it does mean is everyone adjusts to the rules. Okay, and I'll give you an example after this. Anthropologists find it useful to distinguish between ideal culture and real culture. Ideal culture consists of what people say they should do and what they say they do. Real culture refers to the actual behavior as observed by the anthropologist. So, ideal culture is, you know, I come to class prepared to teach every day and I'm always on time. Real culture is I'm sometimes not prepared and sometimes I'm not on time. Right? Pretty straightforward. Now, what's important though is what's a good example is marriage, right? A lot of cultures restrict people from having sex before marriage. Does that mean no one has sex before marriage? Of course not. But what it does mean is the way they do it will be a little different than if they didn't restrict sex before marriage. Okay? So it shapes your decisions and thought processes, but it doesn't tell you what to do. Alright. Ethnocentrism and ethics. Ethnocentrism is the tendency to view one's own culture as superior and to apply one's own cultural values in judging the behavior and beliefs of people raised in other cultures. Cultural relativism is the opposite of that. It's the viewpoint that behavior in one culture should not be judged by the standards of another culture. Sounds pretty obvious, right? So what's an extreme example of ethnocentrism? It's like, you know, Hitler, right? He believed that certain people and certain cultures were better than other people in other cultures, right? But let's take it to a micro level, right? Like, let's say that, you know, in some cultures, it's polite to chew quietly. And in other cultures, it's polite to chew loudly. Now, let's say the loud person is in a quiet person's house and they're chewing really loud. You know, who knows what they're going to think. Like, oh, this person, like, has no manners, they're uneducated, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? That's another form of ethnocentrism. Cultural relativism is the opposite of that, and it's basically saying that, like, hey, instead of being, like, that person that's chewing so loud is so rude, it's like, oh, hey, you know, that's probably how they were raised, and that's okay. It's as simple as that. Mechanisms of cultural change, So basically, these are ways in which culture changes. Diffusion of traits between cultures, acculturation, and independent invention. Okay? These are pretty straightforward. You know, don't worry too much about them. Diffusion of traits between cultures. It's basically when cultures meet, right? Like Mexico and the United States, I guess, right? Like they're just next to each other, and so they exchange, right? If you go to places like Arizona, Texas, and stuff, they have a very heavy Mexican influence. Just like, you know, I'm sure a lot of, like, you know, New York and stuff has a huge influence in Canada. I don't know. But That's basically what they're talking about. Acculturation, unfortunately, is the forced contact with another culture, right? When we're talking about colonization, so like, you know, Puerto Rico, like a lot of places in the Caribbean, like, you know, they were forced essentially to interact with another culture, right? And that's the in more mild words, the ongoing exchange of cultural features that results when groups have continuous first-hand contact. An example of that is pidgin, right? Pidgin languages, where they kind of have attributes of both the native language and the new language that's coming in. Okay. Independent invention is a process by which humans innovate, creatively finding solutions to problems, right? So basically, when you find a solution to a problem, that's independently inventing. Very straightforward. And a great example of that is gerrymandering. If you ever heard of gerrymandering, if you're into politics, what happens is politicians purposefully break up districts so that the voting is in their favor. Okay, that's a great example. Alright, next, the last one, which is very important, is globalization, a series of processes that work transnationally to promote change in a world in which nations and people are increasingly interlinked and mutually dependent. International commerce, finance, travel, tourism, transnational migration, and media. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. Like, you know, any forces that inspire, encourage people to be more international in any way. Like you see, like a lot of K-pop stuff, right? They have English subtitles. That's not that easy. You know, you look at a lot of the Chinese stuff. They ain't got no subtitles. That's because our globalization is a huge mechanism of change for them, right? This is what globalization is. Alright, full circle. What is the main difference between something natural and something being cultural? The main difference is natural is biologically inherited and cultural is something learned. So pretty much anything that's learned is cultural. And that sounds simple, but as you'll see next week, these things might get a little less comfortable as we learn more about it. Okay? Alright, so again, please read and watch our material. Please make sure to do this week's quizzes by Friday. Please make sure to do Reflection 2 by Friday because of my mistake. Reflection 3 is not due until next Friday, and the week after that there will be the midterm. Alright, if you have any questions, please shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kvcc.cuny.edu.